Hey film buffs, welcome back to Film Feature 43. Today we're talking about Scoobert Reginald Valjohnson Doo, better known as Scooby-Doo. That's 100% definitely his name, no need to look that up and fact check me. More specifically, we're talking about the 2004 sequel to the 2002 live-action Scooby-Doo film, which is called Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed. So the reason that I am making a video on this film is because I loved it as a kid. I went and watched the first and second one in movie theaters and happened to be scrolling through HBO Max looking for something to watch and found 1 and 2. So I watched them both. I started brainstorming, trying to figure out what I wanted to do a video on, and found a couple YouTube videos that actually had some good ideas. The first one was Nerd Sync, where he talked about how film 1 and 2 should actually be flipped, where 2 is 1 and 1 is 2. The next video that I found was actually from a YouTube channel called Quality Culture that talked about how the first film was actually an extremely good live-action adaptation, and not arguing any points against that video. It was fairly well made. I started thinking about how, in my personal opinion, the second movie was a better adaptation of the original source material than the first film was. Completely in my opinion, but that's what I wanted to make a video about. So I wrote out my notes to kind of have a loose idea of what I wanted to talk about, and around Halloween, Drew Gooden actually put out a video about how weird the Scooby-Doo movies are. So I was like, it's too close to what I want to talk about, I think. I'm not going to do the video. Then I actually watched his video, and he rarely talked about the 2 live-action adaptations. So, good for me. I'm going to talk about the second film and how I think it is an extremely good adaptation of what the source material is. It's like the old saying goes, not only do great minds think alike, but they also make YouTube videos talking about Scooby-Doo. With all that set up kind of out of the way, I do have one more thing to say. This video is not me saying that Scooby-Doo 2 is Citizen Kane. I think it is a good film, looking through it with nostalgia goggles, but you might not think it's a good film if you're not going into it with the headspace of liking Scooby-Doo to begin with. My argument is that I think it does justice to the source material. While 10-year-old me enjoyed it, I'm comparing this film and its authenticity to the source material to other TV show to live-action movies. So I'm not really doing film-to-film live-action adaptations. So 101 Dalmatians and Jungle Book and Aladdin and Lion King aren't going to be really talked about here. I'm focusing more on the Transformers, the Yogi Bears, and the Garfields to kind of compare the 2. So to kind of lay this out, we have to know what the benchmark that Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed has to hit to be considered a faithful adaptation. Clearly, to be a good adaptation, it has to be entertaining while adhering kind of closely to the source material. And that benchmark is really set by the Scooby-Doo cartoons, which all got started in 1969 when Hanna-Barbera put out Scooby-Doo Where Are You on CBS, and it was a smash hit for CBS. 65% of Nielsen households on Saturday morning tuned into CBS to watch Scooby-Doo. This success spawned 13 total television series, some of which are still running today. It also spawned 45 films, 36 of which were direct-to-video ventures, and it also spawned 46 short films. It also landed the titular Great Dane either 3rd or 4th on the list, depending on where you're looking, of most recognizable cartoon characters, falling behind Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny, and in some lists, Homer Simpson. And the Mystery Inc. gang really spawned kind of this subgenre of mystery-solving teenagers. As humans, we're always interested in mystery solving, whether we're talking about Sherlock Holmes or we're talking about the 106 CSI series that are out there. Scooby-Doo kind of tapped into the kid aspect of that, of being teenagers trying to solve these mysteries. And that still goes on today with things like Riverdale, Stranger Things, and TV shows that are centered around younger audiences solving mysteries and crimes in their own way. So coming out on top, surviving 50 plus years, is Scooby-Doo, and I think nothing encapsulates what Scooby-Doo is more than the sequel to its 2002 live-action film. And don't get me wrong, the first film was fun as a kid. It's the reason why I went and watched the second one in movie theaters, and I think it was a good first stab, but I think the second film does more to kind of establish the Mystery Incorporated gang as we knew them in the cartoons. I think the second film has more of the elements that makes a Scooby-Doo story a Scooby-Doo story. But what are those elements? The first thing is the cast. And granted, the cast from the first film is essentially the same cast from the second film, but I think that each character is more fleshed out. The people who play the characters in the Mystery Inc. gang are really a testament to the casting of both the first film and the second film. But where the first film seemed to try to be a little bit more edgy, they were going to go for more of an R rating, where you kind of still get that in the final product.
Hey, I can look at myself naked.
The second film kind of fell into the groove of knowing what a live-action Mr. Inc. gang would look like. Sarah Michelle Gellar, who plays Daphne Blake, really comes into her own in this film. In the first movie, it took her the whole runtime to have that kind of badass moment.
Now who's the damsel in distress? Straight up.
Where in the second film, she saves Shaggy and Scooby right off the bat. She's a character that is really kind of like an Elle Woods, where she doesn't sacrifice her femininity for being strong and independent. And the second film does a very good job of really showing this. I mean, Sarah Michelle had been beating supernatural forces for 5 years as Buffy, and this film, more so than the first, I think shows that it doesn't really do the damsel in distress kind of role for her anywhere in the film. She's fighting the Black Knight ghost and really coming up with the idea of how to beat the 10,000 volt ghost. Daphne, at least in my recollection, in the cartoons really never had that damsel in distress role that they kind of perpetuated in the first film. And I could be wrong about that. That's just not my memory of Daphne Blake. And I think the chemistry with her on-screen counterpart, Fred, is actually a lot more fleshed out in this film. That could be because Sarah Michelle Gellar and Freddie Prinze Jr., who plays Daphne and Fred respectively, had been together for multiple years at this point. And that's the perfect segue to talk about Fred as a character. In the second film, he's a lot more fleshed out. He doesn't have that dumb guy shtick that we see in the first film. In the first film, he's not really a leader. He's just a guy who stumbles through life being that handsome dumb guy, where in the second film, he feels more like a leader. And in toning that down, he makes Fred a more interesting character. It really gives us a reason to root for him. And Freddie Prinze Jr. has the same name as Fred in the show, so it's almost like he was destined to be Fred from the get-go. The next actor I want to talk about is Linda Cardellini and her kind of immersion into the character of Velma. Growing up, her portrayal of Velma was the end-all be-all performance for me for the character of Velma. Did you know that Linda Cardellini actually plays Hawkeye's wife in Avengers Age of Ultron? You probably did, because you're probably smarter than I am. I'm a big dummy, and the whole time I'm watching Avengers Age of Ultron, I'm like, I recognize that person, but I didn't know where I knew her from. After I got out, I looked it up, and sure enough, it was Velma from Scooby-Doo, and to me, for some reason, that blew my mind, because she acts so well as Velma, this kind of smart and yet kind of insecure person in herself. And in this film, she goes through some stuff.
Who's your mommy?
But ultimately figures out that it's okay to wear glasses and be the smart girl and be yourself. That's something that Daphne and Velma's character in these films really plays to the strength of these films. It's okay to be the pretty girl who isn't always the smartest in the room, and it's okay to be the girl who wears the frumpy sweaters and is the smartest one in the room. You can be who you want to be no matter what end of the spectrum you land on, and I think that that speaks to Scooby-Doo as a whole, where in the cartoons, it wasn't necessarily a boys' show. It wasn't necessarily a girls' show. It was Scooby-Doo. It was a show about a bunch of teenagers and their talking dogs solving mysteries. Although the spectrum was there. You had the smart girl, and that was not as outgoing and pretty in traditional standards. You had the pretty rich girl, you had the jock, and then you had the two lazy guys in the group. And speaking of the two lazy guys in the group, Matthew Lillard playing Shaggy was a perfect get.
What kind of performance do you call that? You made me sound like a total space cadet, man!
From the voice to the manic acting that we see in a lot of Matthew Lillard's roles.
I'm feeling woozy here!
It all plays very well into the antics of Shaggy Rogers, which probably lends credence to him playing the character for 20 years now.
Originally, I would scream myself hoarse. So if you take your voice and go from the bass of your voice to the falsetto, oh, there's that little crack. Like that's where it lives. My voice is screwed up right now, so boy, dude.
He's acting opposite absolutely nothing, just air. They didn't have a puppet for the Scooby-Doo like was initially going to be, and you can't really tell when you go throughout the film, and that adds credence to the fact that Matthew Lillard was the right pick for Shaggy.
I do it very easily now.
As far as Scooby-Doo goes, the way that he talks and the way that he acts is almost ripped straight from the cartoon. Now granted, the CGI isn't great, but it was 2004. You can't really expect cutting-edge CGI, and even today, it beats out some movies that are made. If you've ever seen CIA, which I just watched,
Who was that funky monkey?
that I might talk about in the future, that CGI is absolutely terrible. And so compared to even 2004 Scooby-Doo, there have been films that have had worse CGI come out, so you can't really knock it for the CGI, but the character of Scooby-Doo is almost like you're watching an episode of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And that goes for the cast as a whole. The Jinkies and the
My glasses.
likes and the zoinkses are all there, and adds to the authenticity. And let's not forget the Mystery Machine, where in the original show, if they weren't staying in a haunted mansion or a haunted amusement park, they're probably staying in this van down by the river somewhere because they really didn't have anywhere else to stay. And the Mystery Machine became a character in of itself, where it would always break down at the inopportune time or it'd be sabotaged to where they couldn't escape. And not having it in the first film, I think, is a detriment to that first film. And I think all in all, the team as a whole is a lot more stronger in this second film, with the benefit of taking what worked in the first film and kind of transitioning it into the second film to make it closer to the source material. The second thing that I think really works for this film over the first film and adaptations as a whole is the villains. In the first film, Rowan Atkinson was fine.
Oh, I can go and claws and everything.
He did an okay job, and I guess having Scrappy as the main villain, kind of as the man behind the mask, fine, but it doesn't really bring back nostalgia for the original show. A lot of people actually like Scrappy-Doo whenever he was first brought in to save the show, and then only with the benefit of hindsight did people think he was annoying. So making him the major villain might be a jumping the shark moment that you would expect more from a sequel than the first movie of the series. But bringing back villains from the past, kind of like was done in Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase, but giving it an organic way to do that, really lends credence to this as an adaptation. I mean, what were people tuning in for back in the 1960s and 70s to the original Scooby-Doo cartoons? It wasn't the plot twists and the riveting storytelling, because 9 times out of 10, whether they went to an abandoned amusement park, abandoned hotel, or abandoned castle, it was going to be a man in the mask trying to get people away because he found a treasure in the basement or he found a treasure in the mining caves. Whenever you bring back characters like the Miner 49er and Captain Cutler and the Black Knight Ghost, it really brings back the nostalgia for the 50-somethings that were watching in 2004 with their children, and gave kind of an introduction of those characters to the children to kind of love them for themselves and go back and watch the original cartoon and be like, oh, that's the one that I saw in the movie, and that's the guy that I saw in the movie, and really give that tie to the original cartoon. And also reminiscent of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, you have characters like the skeletons that keep falling apart and the cotton candy monster that are more goofy and more kid-centric that kids will also like. And A Pup Named Scooby-Doo did that often with nacho cheese monsters and other food-based monsters that weren't as scary but really lended more to the kid-friendly aspect, like this film kind of balances both. The nostalgia and the kid-friendliness can't really be said for the emaciated Energizer Buddies in the first film. They're kind of too scary to be cute for the kids, and there's no nostalgic factor for the parents. Scooby-Doo really didn't even do real monsters until the 1980s with the Boo Brothers and the Ghoul School, and they really didn't dive into the scary stuff until we go to the haunted Civil War Cat Island in Zombie Island. So having that in the first film, both those type of aspects, panders more towards the later Scooby-Doo audiences than the actual 1960s, 70s, and 80s audiences. And even having a woman behind the mask also be a man behind the woman behind the mask seems like something that could be ripped straight out of the original cartoon. So that's why I think a point has to go in the sequel's favor for villains. The third thing that I think this film has going for it is its location. Being set in Coolsville, having the childhood treehouse that we saw in A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, and just the kind of overarching location in general, being Winkle's mansion, lends credence to this being a live-action adaptation, more so than the weird Mr. Bean brainwash fake ride castle thing that we got in the first film that seemed a lot more fake, a lot more set up, where Winkle's mansion seems musty and dirty and like something that they would have gone in the original series. The fourth thing that I think really sets this film apart as being a good live action adaptation is it's an original story, but it has those nostalgic beats that we really didn't get a lot in the first film. I keep saying that about the villains, but the story as a whole, as we focus on science that's real in the world of Scooby-Doo, of bringing these monsters to life, there's really not a lot that's questioned whenever that is able to be done. And that's kind of similar to the original cartoon, where in the 1960s and 70s we're getting villains like giant robots that are running amusement parks and projector ghosts that are able to look real enough to scare people and go through the walls, where in 1970s those type of innovative breakthroughs didn't exist, and that's kind of how this is in 2004. There's not really a scientific way to take costumes and make them into real monsters, but it was done in this film and it was never questioned, which kind of follows the logic of the original series. And we kind of get this in Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. You get blasts from the past and kind of inklings of the gang's past over here, but it's a new story and you kind of get more of the magical aspect and the curse aspect that we get in the first film, but it's linked with scientific explanations. So with all that being said, Scooby-Doo 2 is far from being the first live-action adaptation of a cartoon TV series. You got the Flintstones and Casper and Inspector Gadget, and obviously the first film, and by far it's not the last live-action adaptation that we've got. We've gotten Transformers and Alvin and the Chipmunks and Yogi Bear and Woody the Woodpecker, and they're going to make these from now till the end of time. Some of these films have fared better than others. I mean, there's 73 Transformers films out there, but none of them, in my opinion, have struck a balance between adaptation and being entertaining. Really sticking with the source material, but being something that I want to go back and watch. I want to scroll through HBO Max and find Scooby-Doo 1 and 2, even though 1 doesn't adhere to the material as much, making it kind of lesser of an adaptation in my mind. I still want to watch them because they're both entertaining. But I can scroll down through, and if I saw Yogi Bear or the Flintstones movie, those two movies are ones that I'll probably pass up. And that's not to say that they're both impeccable films, or the second one's an impeccable film and cinematic masterpiece. I am talking about this with nostalgia goggles on. There are problems with the Scooby-Doo Monsters Unleashed. Velma in her leather phase,
Who's your mommy?
the weird Frisbee picture flashback thing to set up the finale, although Scooby-Doo is a dog, and dogs play Frisbee, so I don't really think it needed to be set up. The weird musical number,
Hello, baby.
where Scooby and Shaggy go undercover, and Scooby decides to sing at the bar. The fact that sentient creatures were created out of nothing, and they all disappeared like it was nothing, and nobody really gave a second thought to that. And one thing that the first film does have over this film is there is a Rube Goldberg trap device that the second film is sorely missing.
I have feelings, world, for traps and Daphne.
The first film kind of adhered to that, which is something that the cartoons did all the time. It was a trap where an axe sprung a bowling ball into a fan with feathers that knocked him into a pit with tar, and just that kind of wackiness. We didn't get that in this film. But overlooking those flaws, for me, Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed is the best live-action adaptation. Where some films might be better at adapting the source material, to me they're not as entertaining, like Alvin and the Chipmunks, or other films might be just as entertaining, like the Transformers films, but they don't really adhere to the TV series canon that we know from before. Although Transformers, I guess, really would have to adhere to little toy cars that fold up into robots. But I digress. I think the only thing that Scooby-Doo 2 really is missing is repeating backgrounds and bricks that are different colors that have the clue that we're looking for, and it would be literally the perfect adaptation. But that's what I think, and that's the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and like I said, go down in the description, check out those other 3 videos. Thanks for watching my video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.